This is the Mutual Aid Report.
Your own community.
It's all volunteers.
The love that people have for Chicago.
Led by intergenerational hosts and journalists spotlighting how Chicagoans keep each other safe.
Hello, my name is Eric.
Hi, my name is Rita.
Through food access, youth programs, immigration defense, and grassroots rapid response. Hear practical stories, tools, and invites to volunteer, donate, and show up. Thanks for tuning in. Let's listen in on today's report.
Today on the Mutual Aid Report, we're looking at a story unfolding on Chicago's South Side that sits at the intersection of immigration enforcement, housing instability, and the future of neighborhood development. Last fall, a heavily armed federal operation brought hundreds of agents to an apartment building at 7500 South Shore Drive in the South Shore neighborhood. The raid, carried out by immigration authorities and other federal agencies, resulted in dozens of arrests and left many residents shaken, and in some cases displaced. In the weeks and months that followed, the building's already deteriorating conditions worsened, and a judge ultimately ordered tenants to vacate the property entirely because it had become unsafe to live in. But for many residents and organizers, the story didn't end with the raid. Tenants organized, formed a union, and began demanding repairs, relocation support, and accountability from building management and public officials. Community organizations stepped in to support residents navigating the fallout. At the same time, just a few miles away along the lakefront, another major story is unfolding. The former U.S. Steel Works site, vacant for decades, is being redeveloped into a massive technology campus anchored by a quantum computing facility. Supporters say the project could bring investment and jobs to the South Side, while critics argue the community deserves binding guarantees on environmental cleanup, employment, and protections against displacement. So today we're asking, what does justice look like for tenants forced out of their homes after a federal raid? How are communities organizing in response? And how do these events connect to the broader conversation about development, displacement, and the future of Chicago's Southeast Side? So today we are joined by Dixon Romeo, Executive Director of Southside Together. Southside Together is a grassroots community organization on Chicago's South and Southeast Side that works to build neighborhood leadership and collective power among residents. The group organizes around issues like housing justice, immigration, economic development, and environmental concerns, helping residents advocate for policies and investments that benefit their communities. Dixon Romeo is the executive director with Southside Together, and he joins us now on the Mutual Aid Report. Dixon, for our listeners who are just getting caught up, let's talk about what happened at the 75th and South Shore Drive building. And even though this happened in the fall, why does it matter now?
Yeah, so my name's Dixon Romeo. I'm a member of Southside Together, neighborhood union, community organization here on the South Side of Chicago. And basically, there's been two kind of major things going on in the city over the last couple of years. One has been the escalating cost. There's a lot of things going on in Chicago.
To say
third
the
biggest,
least.
second biggest city in the country, right? Or
Right.
third biggest city. There's always been a narrative around crime, right, in the history of Chicago. And more recently, although those things have always been present, right, the issues around housing and immigration, those have now come to the forefront over the last couple of years, in addition to crime, right, and the connectedness between all three. And so since 2022, at the time, Governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, was basically kidnapping folks from the border, sending them to different cities without, I just use the word kidnapping in terms of like folks weren't clear on where they were going or weren't requesting to be sent to Chicago, right? Like they made a choice to put people on buses and send them to Chicago. And that had it raised a lot of questions in our neighborhoods around like, what does it mean for the city to be resourcing folks who are in need, and then housing those folks in neighborhoods where you have folks who are unhoused, right? Who've been there pre this problem. Obviously, a lot of us thought this then, and we know now for a fact, right? That was intentional strategy on Greg Abbott and other folks' parts to make sure that we can have to try and sow some chaos in our community, and have Black and brown folks arguing with each other, right? In a way that benefited people in power who actually don't care about our outcomes or our communities or even live in them, right? Like, and so ultimately, this was an issue that we've been organizing around like getting folks clear on Black brown solidarity, getting us focused on our targets. Right, there was a set of buildings, 312 properties owned at the time by Ariel Lowenstein, where tenants were doing a rent strike in Woodlawn. And as tenants are doing a rent strike in Woodlawn, he's getting money from the state to move new arrivals into a building that the city also was fining for the living conditions, right?
By the way, these folks own buildings also on like Phillips or Yates or something, right?
Correct.
Okay. On the 7700 block, I think, of Phillips.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
In terms of the 7,500 owners, we're talking about different owners in this thing. I'm just painting the story for folks to see the full context, right?
For sure.
As to why this building matters now. So 7,500 South Shore, I think, obviously got national attention, but it was the pinnacle of an example of what does it look like for these issues to intersect, what tenant unions can do and mean for Black people, and what we need to be doing going forward in our communities to make sure that we have the ability to support ourselves as best we can, right? And so what happened was, you may have seen it on social media, you may have heard about it. Federal government ICE agents raided the building, right? Put zip ties on folks to get everybody out the building. A lot of tenants suspected this, but we know now there's a lot of evidence that points to the landlord being the one who called ICE on the building, right?
Mm-hmm.
The alleged reason was that there was a lot of gang related, right? I think it's called MS. I don't know the proper term, but they were saying it's some sort of gang activity in the building from new arrivals. Zip tie folks left them out, disappeared some of the new arrivals and just left everybody else there, right, to deal with these issues, right? As this happening, the building keeps dilapidating. There's a ton of press conferences from elected officials. Every news outlet in the country is trying to talk to the tenants. They're not talking to folks. They're not catching folks, right? Because folks are scared, right? Would you answer your door for a random person after the last time somebody knocked on your door, they blew it off the hinges, right? Like, I'm not answering the door. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't know what you're talking about. We were able, because we're rooted in our neighborhood and we knew folks in the building, we've been organizing since that happened to get to where there was a tenant union. And obviously what happens also too is that there's salacious stories that people capitalize on, but the framing is always off, right? It's like, this is a tragedy. It's like, no, somebody's responsible for this, right? The landlord is responsible for this, right? President Trump is responsible for ICE. Like any building in the state of Illinois, in the city of Chicago, the governor and the mayor have a responsibility to support.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's the aggressive kind of like fast acting things that are harmful to happen in our neighborhoods, like the fascism, like the ICE agents. But then there's like the sustained neglect, right? The consistent divestment that's also just as violent. And so you went from having a bunch of new arrivals on the front lawn of this building about to getting disappeared to, if the tenants had not organized, they would all been on that. The rest of the tenants would have been on that front lawn too, just getting evicted, right? Because the building got shut down.
Yeah.
And so ultimately the building did get shut down, but because of the organizing tenants they were able to force the landlord to pay folks out some money, the city to provide some resources, and nobody ended up on the street, right? So I don't know if that's helpful, Mario.
Very much so. I do want to go back to that night. I live in Hyde Park, and that night, I heard the helicopters going toward South Shore. There was no denying what I was hearing. And as I have been saying lately, if I heard it, other people heard it as well. If you could, can you take me inside that night and how the residents described to you what ICE was actually doing?
Yeah, so residents have told me personally, like, right, that they felt like the building was being scouted prior to
Hmm.
um that the event happened. And I wasn't there that night. I ended up canvassing the building with some folks the next day. So I guess the same things happened in the morning, like after midnight. And essentially, yeah, like there were markings on some of the doors. People were going and taking some folks out. Some of the doors were marked. The tenants felt. But yeah, like the helicopter parachuted in. We have a lot of residents recorded it or tried to record it. Some of the recordings they weren't working. I know they got different technology and all that stuff, but
Right.
ultimately, yeah, folks said that there was a helicopter, there were vans on the outside. They were recording it. They saw them recording it. Folks were armed. Doors were blown off or kicked in. People were scrambling and like being taken out and zip tied onto the front lawn of the building.
And they weren't presented with warrants or anything. Just
That's
kicking the
that
door
hasn't
in
been
and
shared
direct.
with. Yeah, I can't say it was or wasn't, but none of the tenants named that to me. Like, oh yeah, they showed me the warrant.
Yeah.
Um,
Do we
yeah,
do we happen to know how many residents that night were actually arrested or charged? And if you know, are any of those folks still in an ICE detention center?
we, folks at ICER have been on the case around that aspect of this work, and we've been supporting them and working in coalition with them. We looked at the number was around 26 to 30
Mm-hmm.
based on the different accounts that we heard from folks. Um, but the in terms of where folks are now, we're not sure.
We know there are bad actors involved, seemingly more on the federal level and that landlord, because the city had been on the landlord already and that
Yeah.
building in particular.
Mhm.
Has there been, and well, I'm sorry, let me back up. If that's true, what protections should tenants have in situations like that? Not just at the 7500 building, but in any building on the south side or in the city for that matter.
Yeah, I think most people will be surprised. I think, because of courtroom TV dramas and movies, right? Like we are under the impression that we just have a really robust smorgasbord of like options in certain things and that we can just sue people to shift things, and that's not the case, right? They're very although Chicago has more than maybe other places, right? Like, definitely more than like Miami and Florida, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? But there are very few tenant rights, and the ones we do have came as a result of folks organizing, but they still miss like a lot around enforcement. So, for example, the city can change its operational policies as an executive branch, but there's not a ton on paper on what happens when a building needs to be shut down or foreclosed on or kicked out. Um, some of that stuff is up to the judge's discretion. Some of it is up to the landlord's discretion. Some of it is up to the discretion of the whatever administration and alderperson they're dealing with at the time, right? And so that
Mm-hmm.
needs to be standardized across the board. No one in the city of Chicago should leave for work. Their heat is out, their boilers off, their building's in a bad situation. They're calling 311, they're calling people to get support, and then come home to find their building boarded up, right? That's something we've experienced with 312 Tenants Union, with the CKO Tenants Union, with the Catalyst Tenants Union. So many tenants we've dealt with who are trying to get support end up coming home to the building being shut down and vacated. And there also needs to be a real process because, again, structurally speaking, right, none of us want people in a building where it may burn to the ground.
Right.
It may fall apart, right? Like that's just generally unsafe, right? None of us want that. And at the same time, what's the city's process to making sure when a building is shut down, tenants have more than enough time to find a place to live, they're getting financial resource, right? that's not at their own expense, and then they're being supported, right, in a real way. And so we've been able to organize to make that happen with tenant unions and tenants in the South Shore and Woodlawn that we're engaging with, but that's not something that's happening um, citywide or really codified in a real way
Mm.
in the RLTO, which is a rental landlord tenant ordinance. And so that's something we're really thinking about and want to shift.
Before I get into it about that tenants union, because I think that's really important, it's not just important for this conversation, but overall with rent control being an issue and just the basic rights
Mm-hmm.
of tenants being kind of vague. Although they're like listed, you can go online and see what they are. They're not really practiced properly and defended very well by or absorbed by the city as part of the living experience living in Chicago in an apartment building. But as you said, these folks came home to aborted a building right after that raid. The building was evacuated as well. How does that how does that play out legally if these folks are like, or I'm sorry, if this tenants union is active in that matter? Are these things that went to court? Was there any, besides the city becoming involved again and trying a way to give folks money so that they could survive? What happened after that?
So in the buildings that I mentioned, people were left and were boarded up. I was speaking generally to like vacate.
Yes.
7500 specifically was not boarded up till after the Chancery Court case. So the building was in bad condition. The bank had took it to court. So the city, the bank, and the landlord were in court, and the building ultimately was shut down due to the state of it, which I think neither us, me as a, that was the worst building I've ever seen, and I've been
Mm,
community organizing for 7 years now. All across the neighborhood, there's not a single block in Woodlawn or South Shore I haven't walked or canvassed or know somebody on or have worked with somebody on. I mean, it's the worst building I've seen.
really?
And so I don't, none of us were fighting for folks to stay there because just for the sake of it, but it is better than the alternative, right? Like I would rather have, and to this name is, I'd rather have four walls and spotty utilities than be outside in the freezing cold, right?
Yeah.
That's just an inherently different experience. Um, so I just wanted to offer that context, right? The
Yeah. Yeah.
building did end up getting boarded up after the judge ruled for it to be closed. But again, it took the organizing, pushing the city, working with the city, pushing the landlord, communicating with the judge, trying to intervene in the case to even get consistent stuff in place to protect folks from where they were gonna end up at, which was on the street.
Has there been any plan for that 7500 South Shore Drive building to reopen? What is the plan if there is one?
We don't know, right? And that's part of, as you named, the dilemma that folks are put in, right? Like ultimately, people have the right to own different properties and things, and that's real. But what's the role that the city and the state have in regulating and monitoring and making sure that these things are in place in a way that's safe for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and maintains the value that the city needs to be able to tax its residents and function, right? And that doesn't exist, right? There is no rental registry where you or I or folks who live in the broader Chicago can look and say, oh, okay, here's a space where there's some vacant units, or here's a space where, whatever, right? There's no central database that the city has for tracking which landlords are in compliance, which ones consistently get fines, who should we be more proactive in working against? Like, how do we stop the bad landlords from messing it up for everybody, right? Like, those things don't exist. Whereas the place that is centralized in the city where tenants can go and get clarity on their rights, can get their tenant year recognized, right? Can get those guys in administration, can get support, right? Can get financial literacy, whatever the thing is that folks need in their specific situation.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't exist, right? And so we can't answer your question because we don't know, and only the people who own the building can tell us what the plan is to get it open or not.
So now let's go to the tenants union,
Yeah.
because I think that is probably the most important part of this story post ICE raid. Talk to me about how that tenants union was organized and what is happening with the union now post raid of the 7500 building.
Yeah, so right now the tenant union, we're Southside Together staff, Infinity in particular, organized the building. Um, Working on doors, and we worked with an MTO on it as well,
Mm-hmm.
Jonah. But really, what that looked like is working with the tenants, meeting with them consistently, having the tenants come up with a structure, some terms that they wanted to get met, right? The tenants, again, really good organizing, community organizing, tenant organizing is really about folks feeling empowered to make choices to speak for themselves, right? So it's not like I come in a room and I'm like, "This is what we doing, y'all. I'm great," and
Right.
then we walk out, right? It's like, no, here's the space, here's the setting, here's what we know, here's what we don't know. What are we going to do? What are you all going to do? What are the choices you need to make? What are the risks you want to take? What do you want to see? And folks, similar to a labor union, make those choices. And sometimes I may do an interview here or there, but I'm representing what they've told me to say, right? Like, you know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Like, within bounds, right? Like, I'm not gonna lie for anybody or anything like that. And so essentially, that's what happened throughout the weeks before the building was closed. Once the building was closed, the union supported tenants getting to where they needed to go, right? Whether they were, 'cause some of the tenants technically are, homeless in the sense of they're not on the street, but they're doubled up living with family or living with a friend.
Right.
Other folks found places, folks are in the process of finding places. But that's what the work looked like, right? It looked like a lot of organizing on the front end. And then on the back end looked like taking care of each other, making sure we all got where we needed to go, right? So it's like, hey, we gotta get this building by the 12th. It's the 10th. Yo, man, I need you to clean, what you need to, what can I do to help you clean your unit out, right? We got to get out of here. It's over.
Yeah.
Right. And so it looks like all those pieces are run, right? The tenant union is a vehicle for folks to organize and negotiate with their landlord, but also to build community with each other and address things that they're dealing with.
According to Southside Weekly, some of the core demands of the tenants union, the 7500 South Shore Tenants Union, was immediate building repairs, tenant protections, and dignity for residents. Since this building is, I'm guessing, in limbo in regards to the ownership of the building, if the current owners are going to maintain ownership or sell that building to someone else, that would seem to me to be directly against some of the core demands of the tenants union, and not knowing whether or not they're going to sell that building is kind of a big part of this as well. And I'm sure that you've been asked this a million times, but I'll ask again: is there any thought to turning that building into a co-op of sorts, where the tenants own the building?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ideas around how we can envision stuff looking different. The thing I say, Mario, right, too, is like, and I heard another organizer say this from New York, right? But like, bricks don't bleed or cry, right? Like they're not a real, it's a thing and it matters a lot. And when we're organizing, from my perspective, how we organize, how I want to organize, we're always lasered in on the people.
Mm-hmm.
And so whether it's in that building or another building in South Shore, another building, what do we need to change systemically so that, like you said, those things we talked about before don't happen again in the first place, right? So again, I think we would love for it to be a co-op, right? But where we're gonna get the capital to do that is the city investing money in things like that, or are we investing money in quantum facilities that aren't gonna generate? You get what I'm saying? Like that are
Yeah, I
gonna
do.
cause these prices to rise. So to answer your question, yes, that was explored. We thought about that. We were working and trying to see if there could be another buyer who was interested in co-ops or social housing. That ultimately didn't happen. And at the end of the day, the building was in such bad condition. Folks wanted to stay out of necessity, but not because of the conditions, obviously. And so there, a lot of the conditions that did get improved, like the elevator being fixed. I mean, we had folks in wheelchairs who lived on the third, fourth, fifth floor
Mm.
for weeks, and the elevator didn't work. Right, other neighbors were getting their food and bringing it up to them. You
Mm.
get what I'm saying, right? It's like
Sounds a
those
lot
things
like
got
the
fixed.
sounds a lot like the projects.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, like it was, yeah. And so I
Wow.
say all that to say, like, there are a lot, even though the tenants didn't ultimately we didn't get ownership of the building and everyone be able to stay after it got rehabbed and all those things, because those things haven't happened yet. but the tenants did win so much in this process, right?
Mm-hmm.
That improved their quality of life in the short term, but then also create a condition for them to not end up on the street, right? Which is again the worst part.
Now, while all of that is happening in South Shore, at the
Yeah.
same time, at the old U.S. Steelworks site, there is the quantum project that is taking place or is proposed.
Yeah.
What what does that look like in terms of equitable development? Because I know I can only imagine folks that live in that neighborhood or in that surrounding area are very concerned about environmental actions,
Mhm.
about what it does. Does it really mean jobs for folks who live in that neighborhood? If we're talking about quantum technology, who can work there? What's going to happen to 75th and Exchange, for example, or even like
Mhm.
79th and South Shore Drive? What happens around there? And what does that equitable development look like when we talk about the quantum facility, the quantum project?
Yeah, yeah. As a group, our work, we're just fundamentally opposed to the facility. Um, that is based on a number of different things. One of which is because when let's say of every 10 doors we knock, 10 people don't want the facility,
Mm-hmm.
and 9 out of 10 are deeply concerned about it and don't see a benefit. Right.
Right.
I think to your point, and I appreciate the way you asked the questions, Mario, because I think they're really insightful. Look at the historical comparison, right? They've thrown out different numbers, but the side quantum is named there being at different times 150, maybe 300 jobs for the quantum facility, right?
Mm-hmm.
150 to 300, which again is like a big, you know, difference, right? A double is either one, you know what I mean? Like if I
Especially
owed you $10 and I said, all right, I might got five for you, I might got 10.
right.
You looking at me like, yo, what's like that's either you got it or you don't, right?
Right. And considering the fact that thousands of people were hired when it was the steelworks site because that
Well,
steelworks site anchored the whole
that's
neighborhood.
exactly what I'm going to, Mario,
Yeah.
right? Like where are we at as a community that the cost of us maybe getting displaced, having environmental concerns as it pertains to our air, our water, our land, having our rent go up, having our electrical bills go up for 300 jobs when we used to have 20,000.
Mm-hmm.
Right? At its peak, right? U.S. Steel, early days, even as it was deteriorating, you're talking about thousands of jobs to hundreds, and some of these don't require PhDs, right? Do you get what I'm saying,
Yes,
right?
I
Like
do.
if you have to have a quantum PhD to get a good paying job at this center, is that worth everybody in the neighborhood's rent going up or our
Right.
energy bill going up?
Right. And
The
data
quantum
centers take
facility.
water. That's going to be a lot of, there's a lot to consider. And that's the environmental part. I mean, not just the jobs and who can work there and how the wages are affecting the people who live in that building. Now we're talking about 16 different things. We're talking about gentrification of South Shore. We're talking about folks having to leave because they can't afford it. We're talking about new people moving in who absolutely can afford it. That rises the price of everything in that neighborhood. It's amazing to me that this even got as far as it's gotten with the city being so gung ho to do
I mean,
this.
think about it in terms of, right. It took the Obama Center's opening this year. We were able to organize and win our second ordinance around doing everything we can to prevent displacement around the center. And that work hasn't stopped. We're going to continue that. That campaign was never trying to stop the center, but was trying to ensure that there's protections around it. And we've
Mm-hmm.
won a lot, but not enough, and we have to keep going. Right? Not a single person getting displaced is okay from my perspective, from our perspective. But that being said, think about the Obama Center was announced in 2015, and it's going to open now in 2026. Right? The quantum facility got announced, and they say they broke ground. It's really just steel. They're not building the actual computer,
Mm-hmm.
but that happened in the span of what? You get what I mean? It's not even comparable.
Right.
And so I think that also speaks to it, to say that you had community engagement around that. is disingenuous at best.
Mm.
Right, I haven't seen any project that size. Right, that's several times the size of Lincoln Yards. Right, go through like that, and that they can for 150 jobs, of which a lot of them are, and just so many concerns. It just begs the question: um, Do we need a quantum facility? And there's rumors about also a data center with it, right? Like, does that need to be happening? I don't think so.
What do you project will be the outcome of the Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park?
Well, I think we're gonna win. I think ultimately the development will be able to prevent it from happening, and all of that money that we're taking away from our tax base to go towards that be put towards something that really benefits all of us across Chicago, that we have some ownership over, in particular on that site, in that site.
And this is going to be one of my final questions. What would be appropriate for? Let me put it a different way. The steelworks has been gone for decades. It's been
Yeah,
gone.
yeah,
There was talk of a major like mall thing happening on 41. There was talk of maybe, although it's not going to happen, and I think it would have been dope, but I think people would have been afraid to have a stadium built on that site, a concert facility on that site. What do you foresee for that area that would have the same kind of impact that the U.S. Steelworks site had on South Shore and South Chicago?
yeah. I mean, I think every person we've talked to, every person I've talked to, has named a desire for so many things, right? And how is there a process um, to implement those things in a real way, right? Folks have asked for something that brings employment, that they have some ownership over, that addresses some of the needs in the community, that's environmentally safe and friendly. There's so many options. And then there's another thing I would argue is that, let's say for this a thought experiment, let's say nothing ever gets built there and the land gets reinvigorated and remediated and cleaned and made to a place where it's safe.
Mm-hmm.
Could the city use the resources it has? Could the state use the resources, this 500 million, almost $1 billion, to invest in schools, invest in things that exist in the neighborhood to make it thrive, right? So that folks have some ownership and have some control and some agency, versus us feeling like we have to beg and beg and be willing to try and struggle to hold on our house, or maybe we can Airbnb a room out our top room, and I can eat a little less and do a little this, and maybe I skip the dentist so my kid can maybe have a shot to maybe try and maybe get an advance to maybe get a chance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we need what is it like for us to every year really invest in people so that these kind of developments don't make or break our community? 'Cause that's the state. That's the juxtaposition we've been given, right? We don't take these terrible developments, we're not going to get anything. If we do take these not fight and get these terrible developments, we get displaced, our rent go up, our stuff go up. That's been the history of how we've existed as Black and brown folks on this part of the city, and in this city, in this state, and in this country. And what didn't look like that, right? Like the whole system, like we could put something in there or not, right? But just the whole framework around how we keep getting extracted and disposed of when it's convenient for folks who own a company in California for a technology that might work, to have our money to pay for it. That's our path to freedom, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other day I was on the north side of the city, in Lincoln Park, and the question I always ask myself is like, are those parents, are those families, are those communities thinking and having to make those same choices? Right? They're not. We saw with General Iron that they say, "Yo, this is not safe," and the city was like, "You're right, that's not safe. We should move that," and then they drop it in our neighborhood.
Right. Instead of even
Right? I
thinking of,
don't want us.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Dixon. I'm sorry.
No, no. I just think we Black and brown folks have been forced with this choice of like, you know, we be having a bad choice or a worse choice, and I organize so that we're in a place where we can have a third choice, right, which is like what we actually want and need and deserve. And so that's my thought on that question. So yes, there's a bunch of things that we're working on with folks in the community on what should go in that place, and those will be announced soon. But in general, even the framework around like, that being our reality currently is deeply flawed and wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If people want to support the residents or continue to support not having this quantum facility built, how do folks get involved?
So you can go Southside Together on Instagram, Southside Together on Twitter, Southside Together our website. DM the account, post in the comments, fill out the form on the email so you can learn more about what's going on. We have some upcoming meetings. I don't know when this airs specifically, but I can tell you really quickly that we've got some events coming up on the South Chicago and in South Shore around these things, right? We're having a quantum teach-in April 18th. And I believe that will be at April 18th from 12:30 to 2. And if you folks sign in, on the website or on Instagram, we'll send you all the information about where that's at and what we'll be discussing there. But, just come to the event, sign up. We do a good job of following up with everybody. It's going to take all of us to prevent this from happening.
Dixon Romeo, the Executive Director of Southside Together. Thank you so much for being on the Mutual Aid Report, brother. I really appreciate it. And I'm pulling hard for you guys because I'm a former resident of South Shore. I went to school there, Myra Bradwell. That place has a lot of meaning for me. I'm not joking. It means a lot to me that things there work out, because if it works out in South Shore, it works out in the rest of the city. That's a fact. So
that's right.
Thank you for fighting, brother. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Mario. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. As we wrap up today's edition of the Mutual Aid Report, we want to thank Dixon Romeo, Executive Director of Southside Together, for joining us and for the work they continue to do alongside residents on Chicago's South Side. The story of the building at 7500 South Shore Drive is about more than one property. It raises serious concerns about what happens when federal enforcement actions collide with already fragile housing conditions and what responsibility institutions have to the people who call these buildings home. At the same time, the future of the former U.S. Steel South Works site continues to shape the conversation about development across the Southeast Side. The proposed Illinois Quantum and Microelectronics Park promises investment and innovation, but residents are also asking how large-scale projects will translate into real benefits for the communities that have been here all along. These are the kind of questions mutual aid networks, tenant organizers, and community groups are grappling with every day, not just in moments of crisis, but in the long work of building stability and power from the ground up. If you want to learn more about the organizing happening around housing, immigration, enforcement, and development on the South Side, we encourage you to follow and support the work of Southside Together at southsidetogether.org. Thanks for tuning in, and thanks to the organizers, tenants, and neighbors who continue to stand up for one another. I'm Mario Smith, and this has been the Mutual Aid Report.
Thank you for listening to the Mutual Aid Report. If you learned anything from this episode today, we hope you learned that collective care, shared resources, and community action are powerful tools, that when we show up for one another, we create the conditions for everyone to thrive. We'll be back with more stories, insights, and conversations that highlight the power of community. Until next time, take care of yourself so we can take care of each other.